The New York Jets, the team ESPN said won the offseason last year, the draft of drafts. Well, the running back got hurt. Their quarterback looked great in September, then imploded, kind of like their division rivals down south. And at the end of the day, this team left a lot of good building blocks, but a whole lot left to be desired. And we're going to be talking about all of that. The shining moment consistent throughout this season. That defensive line, great pressure, great consistency, and gotta love that. But we can't ignore the elephant in the room. The reason that this team is not going to be successful as long as he is there, the man that they're putting under center, the MILF Hunter, the Wilson. It just is not working. Now, the guy, we can get into a lot of detailed reasons why it doesn't work, but from the lamest point in them building up is he's not fundamentally accurate, nor does he make quick decisions. It's kind of a trend that the Jets have been drafting this type of person, and it didn't work for Darnold, and it does not work for Wilson.
So here's the problem, Joe. Interrupting your train of thought, but building on it. Choo choo.
Go for it.
When you take a look at the Jets and you look at their stats throughout the season, they threw it over 60% of the time.
Ooh, that's not good.
And you have three quarterbacks, and you can speak on this in your discussion here, but they have three quarterbacks who basically had a very difficult time completing passes. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you throw them all together on a team that, nothing's really working for you. But because when Breece Hall got hurt, things started to fall off the rails and they started having to pass more. This is a team that's, when we talked about teams built for the pass, built for the run, this is a team that invested a lot of money in Zach Wilson. They're passing it a lot, but they're getting nothing from Wilson. They're getting nothing from White. They're getting nothing from Flacco. All of them played probably the same amount of games. They all have the same amount of yards. They all have very similar touchdown to interception ratios. They all have the similar completion percentages, with Zach Wilson's being higher than the other two. But what does that tell you about this team is that they need a new quarterback. This isn't working.
Well, that's absolutely what it tells you, is that there are fundamental flaws with Wilson's game. So we'll, he's inaccurate and he's very slow at processing. That's fundamental and cannot be ignored. And there are many different games where we can see that teams, when Wilson was in particular, just flat out disrespected him, left corners that are not normally on islands just be on islands with the assumption that he couldn't complete the pass anyway. Jacksonville in the rain, that's exactly what happened. New England in the second half when it was in Boston, that's what happened. Pittsburgh, that's what happened, but somehow we still beat Pittsburgh. Yes, I'm full biased. I was there. But at the end of the day, what Wilson has for him is the fact that he's a top 10 pick and the GM is basically married to him. So therefore, the Jets are married to him. This is a horrible way to run a franchise. It's a sunk cost. You already wasted that pick. And it's where we're at. Now, we'll cover this more when we're talking about the offseason for the Jets and what to do. But when we look upon what happened with this team, Bob, you are right. When Breece Hall went down, the offense slowed down. But the consistent thing that I want to talk about here, Bob, and give you a chance before we dive fully into the defense is Breece Hall was really, really good when everyone knew they couldn't throw the ball downfield with any consistency. They were a little bit like the Giants where they would try a bomb, just never connected. The difference is the Giants tried one bomb and the Jets threw like 7 a game with the same bad completion percentage. That being said, Bob, I want to let you give a chance to talk about that running back room.
There is a lot to be desired in New York. And one of the reasons I say that is that what you saw as this season went on after they lost Breece Hall is that the backups really don't shine. The backups really don't I mean, they're backups for a reason. Michael Carter was the starter last year, and we thought, okay, there's not going to be there's not going to be a big turnaround for that. It will be okay. And then they have Zonovan Knight, who we were like, as fantasy guys, we were like, oh, well, that's pretty good, right? He had 300 yards on the year. And if you look at the splits between Zonovan Knight and Breece Hall, 85 attempts to 80 for Zonovan Knight to Breece Hall. But Breece Hall offers more. He
Mhm.
offers more in the passing game. He offers more in the running game. And when he went down, it's just a bunch of plotters that there's no electricity to the team. And when you're looking at a quarterback and a quarterback room that was very prone to making mistakes this year, I think as a whole, the quarterback room was responsible for more turnovers than most other quarterback rooms in the league. That
Mhm.
includes fumbles and interceptions. And when you look at how many turnovers they committed versus how many touchdowns they committed, I think they went for like 17 points a game. And any game that you watch, they don't pass the eye test. They don't pass
No.
the eye test in any of those games. And they were lucky. They were really lucky. And luck is a big thing in the NFL. They were really lucky to play the teams that they played when they played them. And they were really lucky to experience the things that they did because this for all of the winning that they did earlier in the season, and I know our guest could speak on this a little bit more that we had earlier in the season, but man, it went from we have hope to we've got garbage, just
Mhm.
straight garbage, and it's a shame because Garrett Wilson is a star. He's a stud. And when you look at the defensive side of the ball and what Sauce Gardner did for this defense had no right to keep this offense in as many games as they were in. And they did. Because
Sure
this,
did.
when we're talking about like teams where the defense is bad and the offense is, pretty good or vice versa, we're talking about an offense that once it lost its electricity is like Mike,
Spot of three.
terrible. It's terrible. It's like the Dirty Jobs guy. What's his name? Mike
Oh,
something
Mike
or other.
Rowe. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike Rowe. Digging in the sewer. That's where this team is on offense. Because if you can't give your electric players the ball, then you're not going to win the game. And Braxton Berrios is a very good player, but at some point in time, they've had him play quarterback. They even had a guy named Chris Streveler come in and play quarterback. Like, what? Huh?
Mhm.
Who? Like, this shouldn't have happened for a professional football team in New York, but it did. And you can speak on this, Joe. That defense was lights out when they needed to, but the offense just couldn't do anything.
Yes, and the defense is why that this team started with such a great record. So as we've talked about many times as we were going through September, because of the nature that most of the NFL treats training camp, where we're not trying to get players hurt, we're trying to bench them, not go all out, it takes longer for offenses in the NFL to catch up to pace rather than the defenses. So defense can come out lightning, they're on fire, they're all healthy, fast, and they're just destroying. And that's where we saw teams with better defenses than offenses at the beginning of the season take off. The Jets being one, the Giants being one, and Jacksonville being examples, where the defenses kind of carried the team, especially Jacksonville is an example with this. So defense on fire. It gets great penetration, very hard to run on it. And this defense will only improve if the offense can control the ball. Because the best way to make a defense better is just let it sit on the bench. And if this offense could put up any single points for it, it has the chance to be regarded in the same type of light as the 2000s Ravens, the 2000s Steelers, just teams that get after you, teams that are constantly hitting you and making your life difficult. And this defense has the potential to do tons and tons of great things. But the problem is they're on the field too much because of that lack of electricity. And then the other thing that every defense is susceptible to is that as you're getting exposed on the field, you just eventually wear down. You wear down and wear out. And it doesn't matter how great you are as a starting point, if you don't get the time of possession in your favor, where you're playing meaningful stats more often than you should be, it doesn't really work. And yes, the Jets' defense time possession is skewed a little bit because of how many people took a knee against them at the end of games. But still, this defense is elite. And we look at some games that, like the last game of the year against Miami, if they even had a halfway competent offense, it's an easy win for them. And there's a lot of games throughout the year where that's the case. I go back to the games against the Patriots. If they had even a little bit of an offensive presence, Jones will never beat this defense if the offense can put up 20 points. That's a fact about the Jets, and that is something to be absolutely confident in writing home about. So there's a lot of optimism with this team if they can get the offense, primarily the quarterback, back in light. So Bob, I want to give you a chance to bring this one home here.
These are the stats we're looking at when we're talking about the Jets. These stats, they come from teamrankings.com, which is a great resource. Everybody should check that out. These stats are really interesting. They have the number one defense by value of opponents' touchdowns a game. Okay? They let up the second most points a game, but they score the 29th most points in a game.
That means they let up the second least amount of
So,
points, by the way.
exactly. So, they let up 18 points a game, and they only scored 17 points a game on average.
Mm-hmm.
That is a recipe to lose, or at least be in some games. But those are losses they could have easily skewed towards wins. Now you're looking at their penalties. Again, another thing. A young team is often an undisciplined team. They get a lot of penalties on defense. They get a lot of penalties on offense. They need some cohesion on those two fronts. If this team, and this is something that you could say about a lot of the NFC East teams, minus Buffalo, is if they could figure out the offense, this would be an actually pretty decent division.
Mm-hmm.
But they can't. And they haven't for a while now. And that's the one thing about the Jets all year is that we could have been talking about them potentially in the playoffs. We almost saw them in the playoffs. But their offense is a dumpster fire.